Okay, thanks everyone for joining. We'll go ahead and get started. This is Steve Reed with Q Markets, and this is another one in our series of Lunch and Learns is what we're calling it. And so we've done this now for most of this year. The goal is to allow you as a customer, or in some cases, I know we have some clients who aren't customers, but be able to share best practices from a combination of ways. And one of them is from our actual clients, and we've had customers share best practices in the past. Today we have Gerrit Aske, CEO and co-founder of SparQ360, as well as Morgan Anderson, also co-founder of SparQ360. They've been a partner of ours for years and worked together on projects, and we're going to share best practices today. One thing I want to make sure you're all aware of is please feel free to if you want to type in the chat your questions, great. We'll definitely address them. In some cases, we may jump on them earlier, but if not, the agenda at this point is Spark will share a little bit about themselves and some best practices on engagement and in taking ideas and being able to build them out. And then I'll share from Q Markets standpoint some ways that software enables what Spark is sharing, and 4 or 5 good best practices that you can walk away with. And then at that point, we'll jump into the Q&A section. So please feel free to type in any questions you have. If not, when we get to the Q&A portion, we'll hand it off to you. So Morgan, if you want to jump on there. Yeah,
yeah, Steve, thanks for the kind introduction. My name is Gerrit Aske. I'm Dutch, so I don't know if you Gert or Gert or whatever you want to call me. I'm here with Morgan, and in the next couple of minutes, we're going to talk a little bit about Spark and what we're doing and how we're basically partnering with Q Markets. Q Markets is for us a technology partner, and we are a delivery partner for Q Markets. And we found each other because we found out that basically in the combination, we can provide the most value to our customers. We've looked at about 120 applications on innovation, and we selected Q Markets because we felt it was a superior product. And at the same time, we've seen that once you have the product, you can start scaling, but you still need to implement what you're doing. And that's where the partnership comes about. We basically enter with our customers using Q Markets, and then we are developing a process, and basically we team up with the customer to make sure that the ideas are not only getting generated, but they're actually getting pushed through the funnel, because it's great to generate it, but you need to get it towards actionable results, right? So we start at the top of the funnel, and it's all configurable, and then basically we push it down towards the level where it's a approved business case. And especially with large organizations, and I've been a CEO myself of larger public organization, there's this very strict governance process that large corporations have to get approval for CAPEX or OPEX or whatever. So, and we basically configure the system in such a way that we marry up with the internal governance process of big corporations. And in some other cases, clients are being asked to adapt to the technology. We adapt the technology to the current process that is the proven practice within the corporation. And then basically what we do, once we've selected those ideas and we've got processes for that, heat maps and a lot of stuff we could talk about later, then we basically help to realize the ideas into practice, because we have found that in many cases, initiatives are being kickstarted. There's innovation departments, they crank out a lot of projects, but then for some reason, the circle isn't closed. It is not being brought to the finish line. And especially for people that have been working longer time in large organizations, they went through these cycles a couple of times, and then they see that it's not reaching the finish line, and it's demotivating. So we're helping to make sure that we start demonstrating quick wins or quick results, and then we can do the larger innovations. We can do it later, the medium or the large ideas. Some ideas take 1 or 2 years to implement, right? Some small ideas you can do in a month. And that's basically how we slice and dice the delivery of those ideas into the actual results of the corporation. And when we talk to the innovation departments, then obviously we create programs and sequences. but the financial guys would like to see when does all this endeavor translate into actual P&L. And that's why we love the funnel of QMarkets, because we can actually show the value dropping into the funnel towards realization. And we started as an idea management consulting company, and then we found out that we don't just need the ideation management process, but we also need to have the realization process and make sure that that is actually being done. And maybe I can show that in the second slide. So here, that works. What's the second slide? Technology, I love it. So we basically, and that's when we're going to talk about realization. We basically solve three big problems because we found out that those are the different perspectives that our clients look at when we talk about open innovation or continuous improvement. They either have costs that are too high, and then they need savings or they need new products to protect their market share, or there's a resistance to change. People just don't want to move. You can have a great idea, but if people are not buying into it, then you're right, but you're not getting your way. And third, there needs to be a level of engagement and participation. Otherwise, the process is great and the technology is great, but nobody's driving, right? And that is where the marriage between QMarkets and SparQ actually works, because we're using this technology and we're using the Porsche, but then we're coming into our customers to help them to learn how to drive it and accelerate it. And that's where the marriage makes sense. Our background is basically coming from Lean. So when we basically talk to customers, we also share our own practice and our own experience. And we have done this for global customers. We have offices in the US and in Europe. We are accustomed to working with large organizations, and we know how complicated that might be. What is a reality in the US region might be difficult to implement in EMEA, or vice versa. That's not automatically a given. We understand those sensitivities, and we understand how to basically align those different perspectives. And what we also do is we make sure that people feel invited to participate in this process. There are and if we talk about innovation, there's incremental innovation, there's disruptive innovation, and depending on the color of that innovation, the participation level might be different. And what we found out is that if you make this transparent and people are actually invited to comment on ideas of others or collaborate three ideas into a bigger initiative, that's when the actual, I would say, culture of innovation starts to happen. There's a direct link between the level of participation within the corporation. Is it alive? Is it visible? Are the results being communicated back? Once that's going and it becomes, I would say, part of the normal practice, then you're not just following process, you're not just getting results, but you're actually building a culture of innovation, of improvement. And we call this brushing your teeth, right? If you do this without thinking about it, but you're doing this because it's the right thing to do, then that's the holy grail. That's where you want to go. And then you can focus this collective intelligence of your client either towards an innovative new product, or you can take part of the value chain and optimize that process. And it depends on what the challenge of the particular customer is. And we really focus on getting it done. And because of our background in Lean, we know how to activate the people on the floor to actually participate in those initiatives, take this idea and getting it in an agile way or a step-by-step way, actually implement it. And as soon as it's implemented and people start to experience the benefits, that basically gives them appetite to take the next one. And that's how you can make this from ad hoc projects into an ongoing and continuing process. Now, and the focus, as you can see, and I'll only talk 30 seconds on this, you see IDEATE in the middle, but you need to have a basis of engagement for people to participate, and you need to make sure that the ideas are actually realized. And the next slide then talks about how that realization is done. And we are using a lot of proven Lean tools and processes to make sure that we can implement on any level in the organization. We try to keep the tool simple so everybody can participate. And then we'll basically take all the ideas in the funnel. We'll do impact matrix, we'll do value stream mapping, we'll do A3s. We'll make sure that everything is communicated and the progress is communicated in a very simple and transparent way. And on the right side of this slide, you see that this could be either from light touch to high touch. And that's basically all linked to how much capacity the customer has. Because we've talked to a lot of large organizations where the organization has had several restructurings or integrations, and then there's simply not enough people to do all this change work or innovation work because they need all hands on deck to do the primary process. And there's all this stuff out there. There's all these great ideas. There's this funnel with, with a lot of value. We talked to a manufacturing company in the US last year. They had an internal process and they had about $90 million of ideas, but they didn't have the process to implement it. They didn't have the governance. They couldn't agree on who would steer the boat, and they didn't have the process. And because all of that stuff not being there, they couldn't allocate resources. So they were behind budget. They had 90 million of ideas to actually get there, and they couldn't make it work. And that's where SparQ steps in. We take our lean experts and we go in and we basically share our experience. We know the politics in big organizations. We know how this works. And because we use Q markets and we make the transparency easy, it's easy for people to start to implement. And I think the philosophy we have is that once we've done this and you've been to 2 or 3 cycles, the experience builds up and then people can take that momentum on for themselves, because that's what we want to do. We want to create the momentum and make sure that the ideas hit the bottom line.
We'll keep this short, but what I want to share now is based on what Gert shared. The good news is if you have a software, everything that he's describing, and this is why we love partners, is the software is extremely flexible. Whatever process you're trying to implement or are implementing, the software can be quickly configured to reflect it. So what I'm going to focus on is to give you 5 tips on really how do you get engagement and collaborate. So a couple of things I want to highlight. So starting off with building a community of innovators. So it's one thing as a company, and so I work with myself about 25 clients throughout North America out of the several hundred clients that we have. And so just talking between my customers and our global team, this has probably been one of the most valuable things. This came from one of our largest customers in Europe, global company that I think at last number had 1% of all revenue sales of any product in the world. So it's a massive company. And one thing that they were seeing is, to Gert's point here, it's really easy to collect ideas, right? So you could have, and this company literally has thousands of ideas that are pumped out each month. But the question becomes, how do we build something out of these, right? How do we scale this when we have a finite amount of resources? And so in working with them, one thing that we added and have pushed out to all our clients is the ability to do what we call join the team or hop on the bus or whatever you want to call it. Everyone can call it something different, but you'll see here, when I see an idea I like, I'm able to say, not only is this a good idea, but this is something that I have experience with, I have background on, and I'd like to be a part of the team that builds that out. So another thing to really try and take advantage of is how do you reward and recognize your employees, right? So our best clients and the best statistic companies that are getting the significant ideas and getting a lot of collaboration, it starts with clearly identifying what is the payout. So one example, we have a client that joined us earlier this year with 10,000 employees, a professional services company in the US. They kicked off with their CEO at the town hall meeting, what they called the CEO challenge, right? And it was publicized, everyone was aware of it, there was a lot of build up to it, and it was clearly defined as to how they were going to recognize employees. And so after they finished that challenge, that campaign, which they ran for a little over a month, they had 2,500 ideas. So if you think of, I've seen companies that are customers of ours who, you know, for them, 10% would be significant of their workforce. So to be able to push out their first campaign, that kind of collaboration says it's really important that you have C-level interaction, and that you really build up momentum on your ideas. So, and then this leads into another piece of the software. So I'm showing you screenshots. What I don't want to do is a demo. So I'm just going to share with the feedback. You'll see some of the what it looks like on our software. But to that point, then what I would say is take advantage of the gamification. If you're not a QMarkets customer, we still would love to share between Spark and QMarkets how to engage your clients, right? And that's something that we offer to all our new clients. But key is to come up with a program, right? So I have a large client that's based out of Japan. They have a company store, and the way they do it is there's a set of rewards. And so as you collaborate, whether it's submitting ideas or voting, whatever your interaction is, as you do it, you earn points, and those points can be converted right into the company store. So if that's an approach you take, great. Another thing that I would mention is in the clients that I work with, probably the biggest thing that's happening right now is doing what we call this Intrapreneur Model, which is I don't just submit an idea, but I own the idea. So whether it's Shark Tank, whether it's monthly Innovator or quarterly Innovator, I have a client in the Northeast that does right around the time of the Oscars, they do a Oscars of Innovation night where they recognize top contributors to their platform with a dinner. So and give out awards. So whatever you're trying to do, make it fit your culture. And then another key thing here is to communicate, right? So one of our co-founders who will speak to clients, his big thing is communicate, communicate, communicate. And that starts 30 days before you want to invite your audience. That goes ongoing, whether it's creating pens, pencils, shirts, whatever your culture is, to really build around that and to build momentum, and then to continue to communicate. So while you're running that campaign, reach out, right? Use the tools that you have in place. So this will be the last thing that I think is really critical is, you know, of course, the advanced communication, but today your company probably uses Slack. They might use Yammer. You might have Microsoft Teams. What you don't want to do is run in parallel a topic on Slack, right? So with the integrations that we do, it's very simple to create a community on Slack that clicks on a link and they're invited to jump over to the platform, and now they're engaging with a much bigger audience. So take advantage of integrations with existing social media platforms that you already use, right? Whether that's Facebook, LinkedIn, anything that your company leverages today to get ideas, we can connect to. So, and then I would also say, as an extra one here, I put in avoid innovation fatigue. Just remember that you may have 100,000 or 300,000 employees, but the reality is there's certain things that are applicable to the entire company, but we see great value in companies that create what we call tenants, which is local communities where they're communicating about topics either by geography, by location, by job title, or department. So still continue with company-wide collaboration, but be open to do smaller, more active groups that might get better feedback. So on things that apply to them. So.
To connect with the benefit of that particular group, because typically innovation starts, you know, top down. The company wants to innovate, but then if you want to take it down to the floor or to more granular level, if you can translate it to a benefit for the people that are actually immediately impacted, it really helps to drive momentum forward, because then you bring it down from an abstract level to the day-to-day experience. And once you reach the day-to-day experience, and that's really locked in, then you get, and I can't stress this enough, then you get into an innovation cycle, because you've done it once, it's working, you want to do it again. And we found out that it's actually some kind of a tornado. So it starts as a circle, but it becomes I would say, a sort of tornado of co-creation where people start to increase their collaboration because they see how the more they collaborate and the more they participate, the more it benefits their own working experience. And that's where we believe the Holy Grail is. And one more comment. You've heard a lot about how to execute this process, this innovation process with Q Markets. And we make sure that also on the engagement side, on the front end, people actually want to participate because we link it to the culture, but we also make sure that the engagement, I would say, preconditions are there for them to actually join. And if you marry those two up, those two issues up, and you make sure it's actually being realized, then you create value in a much quicker lead time or throughput time than you might be originally looking into. So there's a huge opportunity to accelerate your innovation and change if you do this right. One example maybe, because live examples are always great. We found out working with customers that some think once we do this, we get some ideas and then it dries up. And we found actually it's the contrary. If you do this right, you can actually explode the value that you can create tenfold or more. We started in the supply chain logistics industry with a global initiatives, and in the first year we actually got $2 million in ideas. And after 10 years, this number with the same organization and the same employees had increased to $90 million on an annual basis. So if you do this right, if you do it consistently, it's a spiral of co-creation. It'll just feed on itself and the value will actually accelerate. So that's why setting this up in the right way that fits your internal process and your culture is so important in the beginning. And that's why we love Q Markets, because the software will adapt to you and not vice versa. And I've been in many ERP discussions where everybody told me that my value chain or my process needed to change towards the software requirements. And I know a lot of companies that actually hate that. So we've learned from that.
But we're going to open up, but I'll start with the first question. So first one is, you had mentioned lean methodology tools you use to validate and realize ideas. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, this is Morgan. Glad to. We use a bevy of lean tools. Sometimes we start with a value stream map to help with the discovery or to fully scope the idea. We typically move into a process called an impact matrix. Some people call it EASE. So how difficult is the project and what's the value? So we put that into a quadrant, and obviously you want to work on the easy projects that are high value. And then we move into an A3 methodology. We typically will have an A3 for each project, and we tie this up into a continuous improvement roadmap process as well. So I know I'm kind of buzzing through this quickly. If you'd like more information, we're glad to have an offline conversation.
So the next question is from someone who says, we're trying to establish what our process even is. And so you've talked about software, you've talked about the consulting. How do we implement this? Is there a way we should go first, or do we do them both at the same time? Any recommendations on how you would address that?
Yeah, I think they really go hand in hand, and we briefly shared a value circle with you during the presentation. We believe it takes all three. So the first step is you have to get the people engaged, the organization engaged, and there's a variety of ways to do that. You need the ideation process and technology that Q Markets provides. And then once you have the ideas, you need to have the resources, processes, and people to actually implement them. So we find that they all fit together. And as Gert mentioned a few times, the circle of co-creation, we believe it's a circle and it feeds on itself. And you really need all three. But one that we didn't spend a lot of time on that Gert did highlight was the engagement. You have to prepare the soil. So if you throw seeds out on the frozen tundra of Lambeau Field, that they're probably going to die. But if the ground is fertile and warmed and watered, those seeds have a chance. And that's the way we view it. The organization needs to be engaged in order for you to fully optimize it.
One more comment on this. It also depends on the state where you're in, because it depends on the state of the company, it depends on the state of the market. If you've done this 6 times and it failed, then our start will be different than if this is a first-time project. So we would sit down with you, and it also depends what the scope of the innovation is. Is it in one particular field of play? So is it in HR or operations or IT, or are you looking to take on the entire company or entire value chain? That's a very different scope. So dependent on those, our approach would be a little bit different, and we would sit down with you to see, to slice and dice the engagement in such a way that your organization would see benefits really quickly. Because there's always this balance between, big appetite and small implementations, right? And that's where we would find, the balance between the ambition and the opportunity to make it happen within your organization. Because most people we talk to are the people that are already committed to make the innovation or the change. But now they just need to sell it to their own organization. And there's a lot of other agendas in that organization that needs to be balanced out. And that's why we typically start with planning sessions to actually understand the lay of the land, because we are not a partner of Q Markets that says, here's the playbook, go to page 4, and this is how it's going to work, because that's just not reality. Each company has a unique culture and a unique process, and maybe also unique politics that we need to take into account to make this work.
Okay. And after that, we'll open it up if there's others. But the question is, what's the number one reason that companies fail, right? They buy a software, they have these ideas that things are going to change, and then they just fail. They're not getting engagement. What's the number one reason for failure?
Resistance to change being a big one, that the old tapes are there, there's culture in place, and just a resistance to change at a cultural level and sometimes at a project level. And then the other piece we see is the inability to actually implement it. And sometimes change is a reason for that. Sometimes there are other causes. But if, and Gert mentioned this earlier, when you get wins on the board, even if they're small wins, you gain momentum. And folks are able to see that it's working, and there's a recognition. So it really feeds on itself. So I would say they're the big ones.
Yeah, the definition of success, because if some of these innovation campaigns are being launched, then from an executive level, it's clear what the value is, but on a work floor level, on an individual benefit, that's hardly ever communicated, or it's assumed that everybody understands. So that's the third reason why change and innovation fails, is that the translation to the individual benefit is not being made properly and upfront. So people cannot commit, and they cannot link to something that they don't understand.
Applies to Q Markets here as well. So what was just said, I think is really important. And so as an example, we've had clients that literally have thousands of ideas and really didn't get excited about the results. And then we've had, I'll never forget this, we did a follow-up, right? It was the first campaign. They ran a topic and they had 5 ideas. And I remember thinking, okay, this isn't great, but we'll work with them and share, best practices. And this was the head of innovation in their company. It was a new job. He had his team on, and they were excited. They said, we've never had an idea submitted. So 5 ideas for them was outstanding, right? So when you're starting with culture, success doesn't have to be a tangible result. And I'll share one that's very specific. So PayPal, the way they see their innovation program is there's no such thing as a bad idea. And so they focus on share your ideas, everyone's treated the same. And so their rewards and recognition program aligns with that. So if I had an idea that was worth $500,000, they would celebrate it as much as an idea that had been submitted 15 times, right? So the key is you're building culture at the start, right? And then the other point that Garrett and I think Morgan made as well is if you have all this success and you don't broadcast it, you've missed the most important point, right? You got to the end zone and you, like my Seahawks, you threw a pass at the 1-yard line and lost the Super Bowl instead of running it in. And so the reality is we've seen companies where they implement 3, 4, 5 ideas, and then they take the time to create content, videos, broadcasts. They announce it and share not just the results, but how this is changing their organization. So I would say if you stop short and don't share feedback and recognize and celebrate your success, you're going to have a hard time when it comes to scaling innovation, right? So I'm going to take a look here because we're not over time, but I don't see any other questions in the queue. So let's see, Elliot, if you can open it up. Does anybody have any questions additional to what was asked that we can address? And let me just say, this is a small crowd, so it's 10 people, so it's a safe environment here. But if anyone doesn't, we're going to send out a presentation, kind of copy of both things, and you'll have contact info for SparQ, and of course, you know how to get a hold of Q Markets. But anything else that anyone wants to add? Okay. All right. Well, I appreciate your guys' time on a Friday. Like I said, we'll continue to do this. We will send out notifications about the next one. We're also going to ask for content ideas. So what we're trying to do is make sure we're sharing. So if you want to learn more about Shark Tanks, if you want to learn more about how to scale innovation, if you're concerned about the biggest risks in setting up an innovation program, whatever it is, please feel free to send feedback because we will look at that for future discussions. And again, thanks, and everybody have a great weekend. Okay, thanks.